The roar of the crowd, the clash of steel, the sands of the Colosseum stained red. We think we know the Roman gladiators from movies and legends. But what if that heroic image is a carefully constructed lie? The truth is a far more disturbing story of ritual sacrifice, industrial-scale slaughter, and a society entertained by unimaginable cruelty. If you're prepared to face the grim reality behind the myth, show your support by hitting that like button. And I'm always fascinated to see our global community, so drop a comment below and tell me what city or country you're watching from today. Let's journey back in time, not to the sun-baked grandeur of the Colosseum, but to a far more humble and chilling beginning. The year is 264 BCE. We are standing in the Forum Boarium, Rome's bustling cattle market. The air, thick with the smell of livestock, dust, and the nearby Tiber River, is unusually still today. The typical cacophony of merchants haggling over oxen and goats has been replaced by a tense, expectant silence. A space has been cleared and a crowd has gathered, not for commerce, but for a ceremony of a kind Rome has never officially witnessed. This is for the funeral of a distinguished aristocrat, Junius Brutus Pera. His sons, Decimus and Marcus, are about to fulfill what they believe is a sacred duty to their father's spirit. But this is not an offering of wine or incense. Into the cleared space step 3 pairs of men, armed with swords and rudimentary shields. They are slaves, captured in some distant campaign, their lives now forfeit. They are here to fight to the death. This is not sport. It is not entertainment. It is a grim religious sacrament, a human sacrifice known as a munus, a term that translates not as games, but as a duty, a gift, or an obligation paid to the spirit of the dead. The belief, a dark echo from their Etruscan neighbours, is that the blood spilled upon the earth will nourish and appease the ghost of the departed nobleman. This is the horrifying, ritualistic seed from which the entire spectacle of the gladiator would grow. The Romans did not invent this practice. They inherited and perfected it. For centuries, the Etruscans, the mysterious civilization that dominated central Italy before Rome's rise, held the belief that a powerful man required armed attendants and servants in the afterlife. Their lavishly painted tombs, like those at Tarquinia, depict scenes of bloody funeral rituals, where prisoners are sacrificed to provide a retinue for the deceased in the next world. The logic was brutal and spiritual. The soul of the fighter, violently dispatched, was thought to follow the soul of the master they were honoring. When Rome absorbed Etruscan culture, it absorbed this custom as well. The first munus for Junius Brutus Pera was a private affair, a family's solemn and bloody tribute. It was a shocking, visceral act, and it captivated those who watched. The Roman elite, ever pragmatic and keenly observant of human nature, took note. They saw the power of this spectacle. It was raw, it was compelling, and it drew a crowd like nothing else. What began as a pious, if gruesome, family obligation soon began to morph. The religious pretext remained, a convenient and respectable veil, but underneath, the purpose was already shifting. For the next 2 centuries, these funeral games remained tied to the deaths of prominent citizens, but the scale began to creep upwards. A funeral became an opportunity, a platform for the living to enhance their own prestige. Staging a munus was a public declaration of a family's wealth, influence, and piety. It was a way of saying, we are so powerful, we can afford to sacrifice human lives to honor our dead. The 3 pairs of fighters at the first games soon became 20, then 50. With every major military victory, especially during the Punic Wars against Carthage, Rome was flooded with thousands of prisoners of war. These captives provided a ready and cheap supply of bodies for the burgeoning funeral industry. The ambitious aristocrats of the Republic saw their chance and began competing to outdo one another, staging ever more elaborate and costly munera. The games became a form of morbid one-upmanship. The thin veneer of religious duty was being sanded away by the friction of naked political ambition. By the time of the late Republic, the connection to funerals was often nominal. a mere excuse for a massive public spectacle designed to win political favor. This was the birth of bread and circuses in its most primal form. Figures like Julius Caesar understood this dynamic better than anyone. To celebrate his father's death, years after the fact, he staged games involving 320 pairs of gladiators in polished silver armor. He even planned a lavish munus in honor of his daughter Julia, who had died in childbirth, a spectacle so vast and expensive that a panicked Senate passed laws to limit the number of fighters a private citizen could display, fearing Caesar was building a private army under the guise of funeral games. The gladiator was no longer a sacrifice for a single dead nobleman, but a pawn in the deadly game of Roman politics, a tool to curry favor with the increasingly powerful Roman mob. And who were these men, whose lives were now currency in the marketplace of political power? Forget the heroic image of a noble warrior freely choosing his destiny. That is a fiction, a comforting lie we've inherited from Hollywood. The overwhelming majority of gladiators were drawn from the most disenfranchised and devalued segments of society. They were, first and foremost, slaves and prisoners of war, the disposable dregs of a vast and brutal empire. They were men captured in the forests of Germany, the hills of Britain, or the plains of Dacia. Men ripped from their homes, separated from their families, and shipped to Rome as human cattle. Their journey was one of complete dehumanization. A captured warrior, who once fought for his own people, would be sold in a slave market, his worth assessed by the quality of his physique and his potential for violence. If purchased by a lanista, a gladiatorial school owner, he was no longer a person, but an investment, a piece of fighting property. Others were condemned criminals. The Roman legal system had a specific punishment, damnatio ad ludum, condemnation to the gladiator school. This was essentially a death sentence, but one that offered the state the grim benefit of providing entertainment before the inevitable end. It was a terrifyingly efficient system. The state disposed of its undesirables while simultaneously providing the populace with the bloody spectacles it craved. And what of the volunteers? They existed, but they were a tiny, desperate minority. Known as octorati, these were free Roman citizens who, for a variety of tragic reasons, chose to sign a contract with a lanista. They were often disgraced soldiers, bankrupt merchants, or men so crippled by debt that selling their own bodies seemed the only way out. For a chance at fame and prize money, they willingly surrendered their freedom and all their legal rights as citizens. They undertook a terrifying oath, the Sacramentum Gladiatorium, swearing to be burned, bound, beaten, and killed by the sword. Upon signing, they were branded and legally ceased to be human. They fell into the category of infames, the shamed ones, a legal status they shared with prostitutes, pimps, and actors. They committed civic suicide, becoming legally dead, all for the slim chance of surviving in an institution designed exclusively for death. This was the true birth of the gladiator, not in a noble choice, but in the crucible of religious sacrifice, political ambition, and human desperation. To understand the gladiator, we must first step inside his cage, the ludus, the gladiatorial school, but erase any image of a modern training camp. This was a high-security prison, a human forge designed for one purpose: to smelt living men into weapons. At the heart of this grim institution was the lanista, the owner and head trainer. In the rigid hierarchy of Roman society, the lanista was a figure of utter contempt. He was a merchant of human flesh, a pimp for the arena, occupying the same social gutter as gravediggers and executioners. Yet, he was also a shrewd and calculating businessman. He purchased human beings at auction, rebellious slaves, captured enemy soldiers, condemned criminals, and saw them not as men, but as raw material. His entire enterprise rested on a brutal calculus: how much to invest in a man's training, feeding, and medical care versus the potential profit from renting him out for the games or selling him to another lanista. He walked a tightrope of immense financial risk. A plague in the barracks or a bad day in the arena could bankrupt him, but a champion gladiator, a star of the Colosseum, could make him fabulously wealthy. This despised figure held the absolute power of life and death over his stable of fighters, a power he wielded with the cold detachment of a butcher judging livestock. Life within the walls of the ludus was a study in brutal contradiction. The daily regimen was one of iron, relentless discipline. New recruits, the novici, were stripped of their names, their pasts, their very identities. They were housed in small, cramped cells, often no larger than a modern prison solitary unit, with barred windows and heavy wooden doors. When not in the training yard, they were frequently kept in chains. Any sign of insubordination was met with swift and savage punishment. The lash was a common tool for correction, its sting a constant reminder of their status as property. More serious offences could result in branding, solitary confinement in darkness, or a summary execution to make an example for the others. The message was unambiguous: you are here to obey, to fight, and to die when commanded. Yet, this brutal existence was paradoxically paired with an extraordinary level of physical care. These men were valuable assets, and a Lannister was not about to let his investment perish from neglect. This is the core paradox of the ludus. The gladiator's body was simultaneously a prison and a temple. While their freedom was non-existent, they received a level of medical attention that would be the envy of almost any free Roman citizen. The famous physician Galen, one of the most brilliant medical minds of the ancient world, served for a time as the chief physician to the ludus in Pergamum. He honed his skills in trauma surgery by patching up the gruesome wounds of the fighters, treating severed tendons, deep lacerations, and shattered bones. This expert care was purely economic. A healed gladiator could fight again. A dead one was a total loss. This investment extended to their diet. Gladiators were nicknamed hordeari, or barley men. They were fed a specific high-carbohydrate diet, rich in barley, beans, and oats. This wasn't to sculpt them into the lean, chiseled warriors we see in movies. It was engineered to build a thick layer of subcutaneous fat over their muscles. This fatty layer served a practical purpose in the arena. It could absorb superficial cuts and slashes, protecting the underlying muscles and arteries from disabling damage. It also made for a bloodier, more visually spectacular fight for the crowd, without necessarily ending the contest prematurely. They were being bulked up not for health, but for performance and durability in the slaughter. The training itself was a grueling scientific process of weaponization. A novitius began his journey at the palus, a thick wooden stake planted in the ground that was the height of a man. For hours every day, he would attack this inanimate opponent with a rudis, a wooden sword that was deliberately twice the weight of a real one. This built the strength, stamina, and muscle memory required for lethal combat. He was not just learning to swing a sword, he was mastering a precise ballet of death, drilled by veteran gladiators or the Lannister himself. Every movement, every parry, every thrust was critiqued and corrected with ruthless efficiency. The goal was to transform fighting from a desperate act of survival into a cold, reflexive science. They were taught not only how to kill effectively, but how to perform. A kill had to be clean, powerful, and entertaining. A clumsy fighter who simply battered his opponent into submission was of less value than one who could dispatch his foe with a flourish of theatrical skill. Beyond the fundamentals, each gladiator was forced into a specialization, becoming a master of a specific class of combat. This created the dynamic matchups the Roman crowds craved, a deadly game of rock, paper, scissors. The nimble retiarius, or netman, was armed only with a trident, a dagger, and a weighted net. He was fast and agile, but almost completely unarmored, relying on speed to ensnare his foe. His natural enemy was the secutor, the chaser, whose armor was designed to counter him. The secutor's helmet was smooth and round, with only tiny eye holes offering no edges for the net to catch upon. Then there was the iconic Murmillo, with his large rectangular shield and fish-crested helmet. often pitted against the Thraex, who carried a small square shield and a terrifying curved scythe-like sword designed to hook around a shield's edge. Each class had its own unique strengths, weaknesses, and fighting philosophy. They trained endlessly against others of their own kind and in mock battles against different classes, learning every nuance of their deadly craft. They were also taught how to die. A gladiator who fell was expected to face the final blow with stoic acceptance, looking his killer in the eye. To beg for mercy was the ultimate disgrace, a shame upon his familia and his lanista. This constant proximity to death forged a strange and powerful bond among the fighters, known as the familia gladiatoria. They lived together, ate the same barley gruel, bled on the same training sand, and knew that tomorrow they might be ordered to kill the man they considered a brother. This shared trauma created an intense, insular society within the ludus. A hierarchy existed, based not on birth or wealth, but on skill, experience, and survival. Veterans commanded respect and mentored the rookies. Despite the brutal competition, evidence from funerary inscriptions reveals deep friendships and a profound sense of community. One tombstone reads, "To Flamma the Secutor, who fought 34 times, lived 30 years. Delicatus erected this for his deserving comrade in arms. They were a band of brothers, united by their shared condemnation and their fleeting moments of glory in the sand. They understood each other in a way no outsider ever could, finding a perverse sense of belonging in the very institution that was designed to kill them. Herein lies the ultimate, dizzying paradox of the gladiators' existence. In the arena, they were superstars. Their images were scribbled as graffiti on city walls. Their likenesses adorned mosaics, lamps, and pottery. They were the celebrity athletes of their day, objects of popular obsession. The most successful fighters, like the aforementioned Flamma, who won his freedom 4 times but chose to continue fighting, gained immense fame and fortune. Aristocratic Roman women, bored with their genteel husbands, would sometimes pay a lanista a fortune for a night with a champion gladiator, drawn to their raw power and the taboo thrill of consorting with someone so close to death. Yet, in the eyes of Roman law and high society, these same men were infames, the shamed ones. They were legally dead, stripped of all civil rights, unable to vote, make a will, or testify in court. They were social outcasts, forever tainted by their association with public slaughter. A gladiator could be cheered by a senator in the Colosseum in the afternoon and be legally considered less than human by that same senator in the Forum the next morning. They were simultaneously idolized and untouchable, celebrities and slaves, living gods of the arena and ghosts in Roman society. This was the true nature of the ludus, not just a factory for killing machines, but a factory for this profound and disturbing paradox. Imagine waking to the sounds of the city of Rome, a feverish energy crackling in the air. This is no ordinary day. This is a day of ludi, the games. The streets are a river of people flowing towards a single, monumental destination, the amphitheatre. The day of the games was a meticulously orchestrated festival of death, a full-day affair designed to shock, awe, and entertain a populace with an insatiable appetite for spectacle. It began with the pompa, a grand procession that was part parade, part religious ceremony. The sponsor of the games, the editor, would ride in a chariot dressed like a triumphant general, followed by musicians, priests carrying statues of the gods, and finally, the stars of the show, the gladiators and beast fighters, marching in elaborate costumes, their weapons gleaming. This was the opening act in a long and bloody play, designed to build anticipation to a fever pitch before a single drop of blood had even been spilled. As the morning sun climbed over the arena's marble rim, the first act began, the venationes, the wild beast hunts. This was a stunning display of the empire's vast reach and wealth. Thousands of exotic, terrified animals, lions from Mesopotamia, tigers from Persia, bears from Caledonia, elephants and rhinos from Africa, even crocodiles from the Nile, were imported at immense cost. The arena floor, the sand, would be transformed with elaborate scenery, painted rocks and artificial trees to mimic a forest or a desert. This wasn't just a hunt, it was theatre. Specially trained hunters, the venatores and bestiarii, armed with spears, bows and daggers, would engage in choreographed combat with the beasts. But often, the spectacle devolved into a chaotic massacre. We have accounts of animals being pitted against each other, a bear against a bull, a lion against a tiger. Sometimes it was pure, unadulterated slaughter, with thousands of defenseless creatures, like deer or ostriches, being driven into the arena simply to be cut down by archers. For the Romans, this was a potent symbol, the wild chaos of nature being tamed and destroyed by the order and power of Rome. Just as the sun reached its zenith, the respectable citizens might leave for their midday meal. But for those who remained, the most grotesque entertainment of all was about to begin. The meridiani, the midday executions. This was not a simple beheading or hanging. The Romans turned capital punishment into a form of perverse, moralistic theatre. The condemned, the noxii, a group composed of murderers, traitors, runaway slaves, and during times of persecution, Christians, were brought out to be killed in the most inventive and horrifying ways imaginable. The most infamous method was damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to beasts. Unarmed prisoners were tied to stakes or simply shoved into the arena as hungry lions, bears, or packs of wild dogs were released upon them. The crowd would watch, morbidly fascinated, as human beings were torn limb from limb. But the Roman ingenuity for cruelty went even further. Executions were often staged as gruesome reenactments of myths and legends. A prisoner might be costumed as the mythical character Orpheus, given a lyre, and then mauled by a bear trained to ignore the music. Another might be dressed as Icarus, hoisted high into the air, and then dropped to his death. The notorious bandit Laureolus was famously reenacted, with a criminal being crucified and then savaged by wild animals. Perhaps most horrifying was the fatal wedding, where a female prisoner was forced to marry a man costumed as the lustful bull from the myth of Pasiphae, a prelude to her public rape and execution by the animal. This was the brutal reality of bread and circuses, a state-sponsored terror campaign disguised as entertainment, reminding every single person in the crowd of the absolute power of the emperor and the horrific consequences of defying Roman law. Only in the afternoon, as the sand was raked clean of blood and entrails, did the main event finally arrive. The munera, the gladiatorial combats. The fighters would parade into the arena once more, this time for the probatio armorum, a formal inspection of their weapons to ensure they were sharp and lethal. They would salute the editor, though likely not with the famous phrase, "We who are about to die salute you." That line is recorded only once, spoken by criminals forced to fight in a naval battle, likely as a plea or protest, not as a standard gladiatorial greeting. The fights themselves were not the chaotic brawls seen in movies. They were governed by strict rules and overseen by two referees, the summa rudis and his assistant, who could pause a fight to give instructions or declare a victor. Each match was a carefully calculated pairing of contrasting fighting styles, a deadly game of rock, paper, scissors. The crowd roared, musicians played frenetic tunes to heighten the tension, and the clash of steel echoed through the amphitheatre. A fight could end in several ways. A clear, fatal blow was won, but more often, a gladiator would be wounded and forced to surrender by raising a single finger. At this moment, his fate left his hands entirely. He would turn to the crowd and the editor, appealing for mission or mercy. A skilled gladiator was a valuable asset, a massive investment for his lanista, who certainly hoped for his survival. But the editor's primary goal was to please the crowd. The mob, whipped into a bloodthirsty frenzy by a day of slaughter, held the man's life in their hands. The famous thumbs-down gesture is likely a misconception. A thumb pointed towards the throat, police verso, was a more probable sign for death, a mime of the killing blow. A closed fist with the thumb tucked inside may have signified mercy, like a sheathed sword. If the verdict was death, The victor would dispatch his opponent clinically, often driving his sword down through the collarbone into the heart or into the back of the neck. A gladiator was trained not just to kill, but to die well, accepting the final blow with stoic resolve. To ensure death was real, attendants dressed as mythological figures, one as Charon, ferryman of the dead, who would strike the body with a hammer, another as Mercury, who would test for life with a hot poker, would enter the arena. The corpse was then unceremoniously dragged out through the gate of Libitina, the goddess of death. This wasn't a sport. It was a complex, horrifying institution designed to channel violence, reinforce social hierarchy, and entertain a populace with the systematic destruction of life on an industrial scale. So, the next time you see a heroic gladiator on screen, remember the dark truth. These games were not noble contests of skill. They were born from human sacrifice, built on the backs of slaves and criminals, and served as a brutal instrument of political control. The Colosseum was not merely a stadium, it was a theatre of terror, a factory of death where the Roman Empire put its cruelty and its power on public display for all to see. The truth of the gladiator is not a story of glory, but a chilling testament to humanity's capacity for calculated, spectacular violence. If this journey into the dark heart of ancient Rome captivated you, please crush the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the history they never taught you in school. What other historical truths should we uncover next? Let me know your ideas in the comments below. Thanks for watching.